1955, Yorkshire. A Monday morning. Margaret was in the kitchen at 7 o'clock. The stove was lit. The bone broth had been simmering since the night before, from the bones of Sunday's roast. The kitchen was warm, full of smells, and everything had its place. There was no fridge, no freezer, no supermarket, no ready meals, no packaged food. Just Margaret, her stove, the meat she bought that morning from the butcher, the vegetables from the greengrocer, and a system her mother and grandmother had taught her. And that system worked. Today I have 10 secrets from that system. Each one surprised me as I researched it. Each one has been forgotten by today's billion-pound food industry. Margaret and the women around her ran their kitchens with a system so effective that its results are what researchers chase after today. Zero waste, zero rubbish, a place for everything and everything in its place. Let's step inside Margaret's kitchen in Yorkshire. Secret 1. They never threw bones away. Sunday dinner in Yorkshire meant a roast. This wasn't just a meal. It was the start of a whole week in the kitchen. The roast came to the table on Sunday. The cold leftovers were eaten with mustard on Monday lunchtime. Then on Tuesday morning, Margaret put the bones into a big pot. Onion, bay leaf, a splash of vinegar, and just enough water to cover them. 6 to 8 hours on a low heat. That liquid is sold today at Whole Foods under the name bone broth. Margaret just called it stock. Or maybe she didn't call it anything at all because to her it was simply a natural thing you made with bones. Modern research shows it supports gut health, protects the joints, and keeps you feeling full for longer. Margaret wasn't doing this for her health. The bones were there, the stove was lit, and throwing food away felt like a sin. Today we see bone broth turn from a trend into an entire industry, packaged, branded, priced at a premium. The very same thing that came out of Margaret's pot. Secret 2, seasonal eating, wasn't a philosophy, it was a necessity. Margaret didn't buy tomatoes in winter because there weren't any. In 1950s England, food out of season simply wasn't available. When she walked into the greengrocers in January, what was there? Leeks, cabbage, root vegetables, apples kept in storage, onions, potatoes. To us today, that sounds limiting, but the body's needs back then matched it perfectly. Seasonal vegetables carry nutrients shaped by the needs of that very season. Margaret ate seasonally because she had no other choice. But without knowing it, this necessity kept her within the best possible way of eating. Today, thousands of articles are written under the title Eat Seasonal. Influencers preach seasonal eating, and some even get paid for it. Margaret didn't see it as a philosophy. She simply walked into the greengrocers in January and bought whatever was there. If you're enjoying these secrets, subscribe and let's keep going. Secret 3, they shopped every single day. There were no supermarkets in 1950s England. The first big shops that brought several stores together under one roof began to appear in the mid-1950s, but they didn't become common until the 1960s. Until then, shopping meant going separately to the butcher, the greengrocer, the baker, and the corner shop. And this shopping was mostly done every single day. Why? Because there was no way to store food for long. Fridges were only slowly becoming common in British homes during the 1950s. In 1956, only 20% of households owned one. A freezer was almost unheard of, so the tomatoes bought from the greengrocer had to be eaten that day or the next. This habit of daily shopping brought many side effects with it. First, the intake of fresh food was very high. The meat, vegetables, and bread bought daily had no processed additives at all. Second, the relationship built with the butcher, the greengrocer, and the baker turned into knowledge. The butcher would tell you which cut was best that day. The greengrocer knew which vegetable was freshest. Third, walking. Pulling a shopping basket or trolley between several shops every day meant, without anyone noticing, a good amount of daily movement. Today's habit of one big weekly shop was simply impossible in 1950s England, and that impossibility turned into a real health advantage. Secret 4. They managed food from the larder. There was no fridge, no freezer. But there was a larder. The larder, sometimes called a pantry, was a must-have in every 1950s British home. It was usually a small room or cupboard on the north-facing wall of the house, away from direct sunlight, fitted with stone or marble shelves. This design used the laws of physics. A north-facing wall gave a cool, steady temperature. The thick stone or marble shelf held the cold thanks to its thermal mass. Food was kept here in a way that was different from today's fridge, but just as effective. Butter stayed firm on the marble shelf. Butter really does last a long time when kept properly cool. Cheese was kept wrapped in muslin cloth in the cool air. Meat waited on the larder shelf until the day it was needed. And here's something I noticed while researching. Butter, cheese, and meat kept in larder conditions were protected from the temperature swings and moisture changes that happen at every stage of today's cold chain. Some food scientists say that cheese left to mature at larder temperature around 10 to 14 degrees develops a deeper flavor than cheese kept at a constant 4 degrees in a fridge. Margaret didn't know this as food science, she just used the larder because it was there. Secret 5. They kept the dripping. Every 1950s British kitchen had a small container next to the stove. The fat that dripped from bacon, meat, or chicken while it cooked, called dripping, was poured into that container, and that fat was used for the next round of cooking. This might sound strange to us today, but dripping in 1950s England wasn't just a way to save money, it was an active cooking ingredient. Beef dripping was used for roasting, pork dripping for pastry and cakes, and chicken dripping for frying vegetables. Animal fats hold their structure well at high heat, meaning they don't break down and produce free radicals at frying temperatures. Margaret, frying with dripping and bacon fat in the 1950s, was using a far more stable cooking fat than the refined vegetable oils most people use today. Today, some circles look down on words like tallow and lard, calling them unhealthy, but Margaret's dripping pot stands for a tradition that people who understand basic chemistry are now returning to. Just a moment. If you know someone rethinking their relationship with the kitchen, someone asking how did they used to do it, send them this video. Sometimes seeing one system changes everything. Secret 6. Stale bread never went in the bin. In Margaret's kitchen, stale bread had at least 5 different uses. Bread that was a day old was grated into breadcrumbs, for frying, for meatballs, for fish cakes. Bread that was 2 days old became a milk pudding. Bread and butter pudding. Bread that was 3 days old was used to thicken soup. Hardened slices were toasted and eaten with cheddar cheese. And if it was too stale for anything else, it went to the birds. There was no such idea as food waste in 1950s England because throwing food away was simply unthinkable, both as a matter of money and as a matter of right and wrong. And this zero waste mindset is exactly what researchers today are rediscovering under names like circular kitchen or nose to tail cooking. Margaret didn't give it a name, she just said bread gets used. Secret 7. Fermenting wasn't a trend, it was a necessity. Jars sat on the lower shelves of the larder. Pickled cabbage, pickled onions, homemade jam, and every kind of preserve that carried summer's plenty through the winter. In the 1950s British kitchen, preserving and fermenting did the job that today's fridge and freezer now do, keeping food safe to eat. But this way of preserving had a side effect. During fermentation, lactobacillus bacteria grew. These are the very same organisms found inside probiotic capsules that sell for £30 today. Margaret's homemade pickled cabbage carried live cultures that support gut health, and she didn't need to make any extra effort for it because the fermenting process produced them on its own. Today, gut health is a billion-pound industry. Probiotic drinks, supplement capsules, courses on fermented food. Margaret's jar of pickled cabbage did all of that for free, and she didn't do it out of health awareness, she did it because she had no other way to keep food through the winter. Secret 8. They planned everything. 1950s British cookery books kept coming back to one single subject, planning meals for the week. Sunday, a hot roast, lamb or beef. Monday, meatballs, or a stew made from Sunday's leftovers. Tuesday, soup made from the bone broth. Wednesday, fish. Friday before fish day habits were common too. Thursday, bacon and eggs or sausages with mashed potato. Friday, fish. In many homes it became tradition even if the family wasn't Catholic. Saturday, something light, sandwiches or cold meat. This system carried a few practical bits of wisdom. First, one big cook turned into several smaller meals. Sunday's roast could feed the family for 4 days. This saved both time and fuel. Second, waste dropped to almost nothing. Everything turned into the next day's meal. Third, keeping to a budget was possible. A woman who knew what she'd be eating that week also knew exactly what she needed to buy. Today, this same system is taught under the name meal prep in books, courses, and YouTube videos. Margaret didn't call it meal planning. It was simply the week, and what would be cooked each day was already decided. Secret 9. They used herbs and spices with real purpose. There were no exotic spices in 1950s England. In fact, look at the table and you'd be surprised. According to DEFRA's records, in the early 1950s, olive oil was sold in chemist shops in small bottles for earache. not for cooking. But within this limit, Margaret had built a thoughtful system of herbs and spices, and it made sense geographically too. Plants that grew naturally in the British climate, thyme, sage, parsley, rosemary, bay leaf, tarragon, were the kitchen's main flavorings, and these plants weren't picked at random. Thyme contains thymol, a strong compound known for fighting bacteria. Sage carries compounds that fight microbes. Bay leaf was known to help with digestion. Parsley is an especially rich source of vitamin C, most of all when used fresh. Margaret didn't know about these compounds. She simply used the plants her mother had used. Today, thyme drops, sage supplements, and rosemary extracts are sold under the name herbal medicine, and every one of their raw ingredients sat in Margaret's kitchen garden. Secret 10. Their cooking methods protected the nutrients. This was the secret that surprised me most while researching. The most common way of cooking in 1950s England was slow cooking. A big pot, a low heat, and hours of time. Why? Because the cuts of meat back then were different from today. Animals were older and less processed at the time, so the only way to make the cheaper cuts, shin, neck, ribs, tender enough to eat was long, slow cooking. But this technique, born out of necessity, had very important effects on nutrition. Fast cooking at high heat breaks down certain B vitamins and amino acids. Long cooking at low heat, on the other hand, turns collagen into gelatin, releases the nutrients from connective tissue into the broth, and helps keep the minerals inside the meat. The stew Margaret cooked for hours on a low flame was doing exactly what today's devices sold as slow cookers try to do, and she did it in a cast iron pot on top of the stove with no extra equipment at all. The cooking wisdom taught today under titles like bone broth, slow cooking, and collagen-rich cooking was simply the everyday practice of the 1950s British kitchen. Margaret didn't think of it as a way to protect nutrients, she just knew there was no other way to cook that meat. Thinking back on these 10 secrets, here's what stands out to me. Not one of them was a product. A steady, repeated system, born from necessity, but woven into every single day of life. Bone broth can still be made, fermented cabbage can still be made, seasonal shopping, slow cooking, and making good use of stale bread are all still possible. You don't need to buy any of this. But the modern food industry won't tell you that, because if it did, it would have nothing left to sell. Margaret's Yorkshire kitchen wasn't chasing any trend. She was simply doing what worked, what her mother and grandmother had taught her. Maybe the problem was never a shortage of what we had on hand. Maybe the problem was that the system got lost. And bringing it back doesn't need a new gadget, a new app, or a new kitchen trend. Just 10 secrets and the willingness to see them. Did your grandmother or your mother follow any of these habits? Do they still? Which of these secrets surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now so I can easily find you when the next video is ready.